So, over the last 30 years, Simon has worked on river basin management, water resources, urban planning, wastewater networks, and treatment projects in the UK and China, looking at both technical and policy aspects. He is a fellow of the Institute of Environmental Sciences, chair of the Foundation for Water Research, and an honorary professor of Nottingham University, UK, and Ningbo campuses. So, over to you, Simon, for tonight's presentation.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Well, yeah, I'd like to present something which is maybe a different way of looking at how we deal with water, energy, and food, and particularly looking at it from the point of view of water. So if I can get this to work. Yeah. So what I'd like to do is to run through a few sort of ideas and then show how they can be turned into some practical methods, things which we could do, how we can take a better approach to changing the way we are that will actually make us more sustainable. So it's a somewhat different view for than most people, but I think it has some merit to it. And so it sort of starts off by thinking about what do we really mean by sustainability and how do we flourish together with nature. I'm then going to go off on a bit of a diversion into the topic of combustion and fire and what our relationship with living things and how we're working with that and how we can change that relationship and work better with natural systems. And having then discussed that in the context of energy, pardon me, I talk about it with regard to water. I should also say, excuse me if I suddenly have coughing fits. I'm just recovering from a cold and I'm in some danger of having a sort of coughing fit at some point. But hopefully it won't attack. Yeah, I'll then give some examples and then go on to describe this practical approach to how we can make the change. And excuse me, I'm just going to have to blow my nose because of this cold situation. Pardon me. Yeah, and then finally, I'll give an example of how some of this has been done in practice and actually tried out, or at least parts of it have been done and partly demonstrated. So to start, the position I want to start from is a bit of work I was involved in a year or two ago, developing our vision for the built environment. This was led by Cambridge University with a lot of partners, which I've dimmed out there. But this was sort of a way of understanding and articulating how we can live with our built environment, all the infrastructure, the houses, the cities, and everything that we have, and also the natural environment, and how working together with those, they provide us with the services which give us the things which we want, the sort of outcomes for people, and then how those are delivered by people and supported and funded, and how that sort of contributes towards the sort of overall transition to achieving sustainable development goals and things. Now, the other thing I want to divert into is the topic of fire and combustion, because it's sometimes overlooked that fire is really quite a wonderful and great thing for us. As we know, humans are very dependent on it. And it really is the basis of human wealth. And if we look here, this is the sort of world population in the last 200 years, and mostly in the last 100 years or less. We have gone from most of us living in abject poverty with just a few just vaguely comfortably off to far, far more people, and most of us living in relative wealth and comfort. And the driver of all of that, what's given us that power, is combustion and fire, and very specifically, the combustion of fossil fuels in combustion chambers. And that gives us heat, it gives us power, it gives mobility, allows us to manufacture products. And it also allows us to separate ourselves from the other animals, to clear away and control our environment. And so we have kind of taken over the world. And what can we sort of attribute this to? And if we look at the energy cycle, in fact, our entire sort of climate and equitable atmosphere are only here because of life, because of living things. Fire itself is only possible because of life. And the first fire probably didn't start until about 500 million years ago, when enough algae and things had created the oxygen in the atmosphere and some dried out carbon on a bit of rock, hit by some lightning, and started fire. Because before that, lightning, volcanoes, stars, they're not fire, they're just hot stuff, hot plasma. So it is actually a very unique process, which, as far as we know, planet Earth is the only place in the universe that has fire as we know it. It may be elsewhere, but we don't know about it yet. And it's the enclosed combustion system, which is the basis of our industrial wealth and plenty. Because the living biosphere, all of life, it creates basically a great disequilibrium between the oxygen in the atmosphere and the carbon put down into the earth, either as carbon like coal or also as carbonates, but that creates this disequilibrium. And we can take a fragment of that in a combustion chamber and we can turn it into a service for us. And that's really useful, incredibly powerful. And we do that using the combustion chamber, and every single combustion chamber belongs to somebody and they have it because they profit from it. So it's a very useful process, but it's also a very damaging process, because when we burn that, we're basically reversing that life process that created our entire climate and living situation. But it's not all a disaster. We are seeing some of the problems of that. But as we have gone through that power from combustion has allowed us to develop an industrial society. We've got knowledge and we now have alternatives. And we are on that path to transition, changing from burning living matter to having renewables and nuclear. And we think a lot about how we're going to transition that supply side, stop burning coal and get our electricity from other sources. But it's actually the demand side. It's the millions of small combustion chambers spread everywhere. Those are really the big problem. And we need to have much better ways of changing that side of things than we do at present. So what are we changing to? So effectively, we need to stop consuming the biosphere. That's what our wealth comes from. I say it's combustion, but when we do that, we are consuming what the biosphere has given to us. But we have these alternatives. Effectively, we can bypass the biosphere. We can get our energy directly from the sun through solar, or slightly less directly with wind and with tidal, and also with nuclear energy. So we're not going through that living system. We're not consuming that system that actually sustains us. And then we can get the services that we want. And as I say, there are ways of doing this. We can either bypass the biosphere to avoid it. We can enhance the biosphere so we get more out of it than we would naturally, or ultimately we can embrace the biosphere so we get what we need, harvesting as part of a living system without destroying that living system. And that's the sort of ideal way to go forward. It's a slightly different model from other people use. I say I want to look at this also from water. So water, energy, and food are the sort of main services that we require. And I want to look at what we've done from rivers and how we're also consuming the biosphere there. Because over the years, ancient people, you settle by a river, you get your clean water from just upstream, and you dump your waste as near downstream as you think you can get away with as little treatment. As we've developed, we build cities, we take our water from further and further upstream, and we have to dump our waste further and further downstream, maybe with more treatment. In the same way, we clear and plow and change the land around us with our industrial agriculture. And as we do that, we diminish and we deplete the soils, which are so vital in the water cycle for holding the water and purifying it and cleaning it. We are also no longer in touch physically with that living ecosystem. Before, the water that we would drink will have living things in it. Our own biome will be adjusted to that, sometimes unpleasantly. And this is also a source of danger. And there's good reasons why we separate ourselves from that system. But also, we are designed to work as part of a living system. And as a result of being separated, we now have an epidemic of autoimmune diseases and all sorts of health issues. And it's not as though we need to just rush out and get back in touch with that biosphere around us, because it's not in a healthy balance. And being too close with that is even worse. So there's a lot of this sort of disconnect that has happened. And as we have developed, say, we've driven the water cycle in one direction, when in fact we need to become more circular and more in touch with it. How can we change that? How can we reverse that direction, as I have in the title? And apart really to do that, we need to use that abundant energy. This is part of why I was alluding to the energy cycle so much, because in the future, very probably, and it may take a while, there may be some ups and downs before we get there, but it is possible to envisage a future where we have lots of energy. As we build the renewable energy systems, they continue to produce. It's cumulative as you add to it, rather than consumptive as the fossil fuel system is. So eventually more energy will be available to us. And then we can start to devote more of that energy to the water cycle. And that allows us to bypass the biosphere for water. Because if we actually take the water more from downstream and pass that upstream, and I'll explain that a little bit more in a minute, we can start to separate ourselves away from that. And at the same time, we need to embrace this biological system, working to restore the health of soils and the hydrological function of nature. And some of that can be through regenerative agriculture and other processes. I don't want to get too much into the details of agricultural transformation. But we need to change that way and come back into more of a balance. And also how we manage the land also affects our weather. And the more we hold the water within the soil, within natural systems, this affects rainfall patterns, and also it affects how the water moves through and into groundwater and affects the whole water cycle. So we have to think about how we do that. So I'll try and illustrate this as quickly as I can without getting too complicated. But basically, the driving downstream, consuming the river, water comes from the hills, we put it through a city, we make it all dirty, bung it in the river, and eventually it ends up in the sea in a bit of a mess. In reversing, the idea of reversing that cycle is more that we start to take from downstream and supply that to back upstream to our cities and to circulate more. It's quite difficult to get that in one diagram, so I have put together something to try and illustrate this. So this is sort of saying, this is sort of looking at the way that we go now. So this is how things were before we arrived. You've got some uplands, the river comes out of it, goes down to the sea. The sea's down here. These are very quickly done diagrams to try and clarify things. I'm not the greatest drawer of diagrams. And then we've built our cities, and they have their water use. And these take water from the river, dump their waste back in. We also reach up into the hills, build a dam, and we supply the water to our cities. The effect of that is that we are taking away this flow. We've got less flow in the river. The flow that is there is more polluted. It's sort of going up and down and is not in any kind of real balance. And same goes for the water which we're taking out of the ground. And where we really need to be going to is taking far less from those upstream areas, less from under the ground, allowing those to recover, returning much cleaner water into the river, and that way the flow in the river maintains much higher. We take the bulk of it towards the lower end, treat, and then pump back up. That means a lot more infrastructure, a lot of energy for pumping and treatment. This is the opposite of the way that we've been doing things for a long time, but we are moving towards going in this direction. One of my mantras is there's actually no such thing as a water shortage. There is just a shortage of energy, infrastructure, and organization. You can get water anywhere. Riyadh is a city in the middle of one of the driest, hottest deserts in the world, on the top of a hill, 400 miles from the sea, and it has abundant water because they burn huge amounts of energy. They've built the infrastructure and they're organized, so they don't have a water shortage. So it can be done anywhere if you've got the will. We also need to learn how to nurture these natural aquatic systems and work with them instead of consuming them, and how that will then increase our water. We need to have those higher levels of treatment, which might mean that actually our discharges into the river become more sterile than they are now. The problem is at the moment we're discharging water which has got the wrong balance of life in it. It's still got lots of life in it, but it's the wrong balance. And we maybe need to allow that natural ecosystem to return and to be able to regenerate our watercourses. And that requires these abundant supplies of energy. Now, this is not a new idea. We are doing this in places, but what I'm saying is doing this on a bigger scale can then give us the benefits of actual total amount of water increases. We'd have a system which is much more resilient to climate shocks, and reducing flood risk in many, many areas as well, due to retaining water better within soils. And this is part of a circular economy system so that we can recover the heat and materials from the water cycle. So this is how we could move to a healthier system. And I'll give some examples now of where this has been done. The first two here are the very technological examples. On the left here is Singapore. Now, Singapore, they recycle a lot of their effluent, but it doesn't go straight back into the supply. So about 40% of the supply they purify, and then they put it back into the reservoir at the top of the system. It goes through the rivers and gets some natural treatment, and then is taken out and reused. The other extreme member is like for Saudi Arabia. These are proposals we had, and similar sort of things will be happening for NEOM, a renewable energy new city in Saudi Arabia, where you have an entirely closed or almost closed water system. Everything is from desalination, all powered by solar energy, and then all materials are recovered and reused. Eventually, some of it goes into the environment for sort of greening, but it becomes a very technological, high energy but renewable energy system. And this is a possible way of going. In the UK, we are also going in this direction. I live in Cambridge, and this is a sort of local example of this, where Anglian Water are proposing to build the Fenland Reservoir. This is to help the delicate chalk stream aquifers, which are wonderful sources of water, but we're way overusing them. So instead of just taking from the chalk uplands, we'll take from the River Great Ouse, lower down near where it goes to the sea, put in a reservoir, store that, and then from there supply the cities of Cambridge, Huntingdon, and other areas there. And that will allow those chalk streams to recover, hopefully, once this gets done. And a very similar scheme in Kent, in their chalklands there, with the Broad Oak reservoir scheme, abstracting from the Stour, storing downstream, and then sending that back upstream in order to rebalance the flow to some degree. So this is at the sort of network level, big scale. I also want to look a bit more about what we can do in our own buildings at the local level. And this will lead in the next section of the talk into looking much more about how we change things at the local level. And the future for us is having built our own homes and things more in touch with the local environment, using green nature-based solutions, sustainable drainage, wetlands and things as part of our housing development. Also incorporating, as many of us do, solar energy into that, decentralized energy, and potentially recycling some of that water on a local level, although that's quite difficult to do. And in fact, network level, wider level is probably a better route than attempting to make everything recycle locally. But what we don't think about so much is the recycling of the energy at the local level. And this is tightly bound with water as well. Because if you want to heat your buildings better, we need to be using local heat networks to spread the heat around, to run heat pumps in our building instead of combustion boilers. And we need we're not going to manage that just with a few air source pumps. We need to be really collecting and sharing that heat and getting a lot more heat into our buildings. And the part of this is also this is basically a new utility, but it can happen at local and regional levels, and you can have sort of interlinked systems and a big variety of systems that work together to be able to distribute that heat using water networks. So again, it's this sort of water and energy network combination which needs to come. But if you want to make transformations like this, you need to be able to fund them and mobilize people to do it and to get them involved, and also to change the sort of land use to create the environment for this sort of infrastructure. And for that, we need to look at how we involve people much better in changing our local infrastructure. And I'm going to try and talk you through a model here, which I've got. That's the whole thing, very complicated, but I'll take you through step by step, and I hope it will make some sense as a way of being able to approach this problem. So sort of going back to my first slide, as it were, the idea that we get services from our built infrastructure and from nature. So what we survive on, what are the services? Well, we need energy, we need water, we need nutrition. We also need beauty in our lives. We shrivel without it. We need the security and shelter of our house, and we also need communication and various other services. You could put 100 things around this circle, but basically we want to live in some sort of connected community, whether it's our own home, group of homes, but we have to be connected to the rest of the world, to the internet, to the power network, and also to the natural systems around us. And those services basically come from two main classes of infrastructure. There's the sort of global national networks, roadways, railways, the electric grid, gas grid. These are at big scale and have to be organized over large areas. And these supply us the sort of bulk goods of most of our energy, also our food supply chain, all of our building materials, manufactured goods. The whole industrial system is sort of in this category, along with global markets, information systems. So that's the sort of big infrastructure side. But a lot of the services that we need come from local infrastructure. I mean, our houses, the buildings, our vehicles, the fields, woodlands, wildlands around us that supply us with water, nutrition, beauty, the things which we actually need to live good lives. And these also relate to, we can have decentralized energy, local markets, so it can link into the more networked elements, but also thinking about what happens at the local level. And then this is trying to model and quantify what this is. So I'm a consultant, we do engineering. You can have the big idea, but you've got to say, well, how do we turn this into something that we can work with, that we can manage? If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. We put numbers to this and think about what are these services. So to cut that, you can come up with sort of metrics of service provision, where you think of these services and you you come up with some sort of figure for what that might be. And to think of those sort of metrics of service provision, say they can be the amount of water you're getting, carbon sequestered, your sort of building warmth. There are multiple benefits that any measure that you take. If you put in a drainage scheme, if you put in a local power scheme or a heat network, there can be multiple benefits that it's providing, not just the one sort of core product. And if you start to map those and understand them, then it can become a lot easier to justify those schemes and to start to sort of stack up what those benefits are and add them together. And this is an important aspect of this, to sort of add the benefits together. And to do that, you have to do it carefully. You've got to be careful not to have double counting. And whenever you're working with numbers, just as carbon markets and carbon offsets will tell you, it can very easily can end up as a gaming exercise. It can become corrupt. So you've got to be very careful to have transparency, standardization, regulation. And these metrics have to actually be assigned to people and organization. There's got to be responsibility there. But the outcome is that you can actually assign a greater value to any measure that you're trying to take. Also, looking at those at any different measure that you might take and understanding how it's connected to other things, that can add to the value. Things, delivery of all of these services requires multiple systems which have to be linked, and how they're connected all adds value. So you need to be able to understand and model that and bring it into being. You also need to understand, as I say, who's responsible for what. And that means understanding the stakeholders that are involved. And in this, I've got a sort of model for this sort of stakeholder mapping. Again, it's going back to that first diagram of the services that you're getting. And then on this side, looking at who's delivering those. And trying to clarify that a little bit more. And I think of this now in terms of 3 tiers. Text may be a little bit small, but you've got tier 1, which is your sort of national organization. This could be government, it could be a water company, a highways agency, railway company. These are people who have to show that they're delivering certain levels of service. And they'll have that sort of cumulative across their systems. And some of that they will be delivering from their network, big infrastructure, and some of it can be delivered by local infrastructure. And if they can actually count and value that, then they can include that in the counting of the services they provide, and thereby provide funding for it as well. They've got to increase their service. If they can do that by paying local people to do local things, then that may be a more efficient way of delivering service. And then at the bottom of the stack is the people on whose land things are delivered, on whose property things are delivered, where things actually happen. So that's the farmers, the homeowners, housing associations, developers, local councils and things, and communities. So this is the bottom level. And what you want to be doing is enabling those people to be able to deliver services to themselves and for that to be counted at the greater level, all the way up to delivering your global sustainable development goals. So how does what I do in my field or on my building actually add towards that greater goal? And that's why you need in the middle the sort of facilitating layer. So people who are there to make this happen, to facilitate, to provide the technical advice, to provide a system and a way of doing things. And pardon me. Yeah, and a framework for funding to pass down through, and for a record of the services that are delivered to return through. So that's, as I say, this sort of model layer. And then if you want to facilitate this, you need to start to use the sort of tools that we have available. And this is, using things such as digital twinning, where you're going to have all of this sort of infrastructure developing. You need to be able to understand how it works, to model it, to be able to, it's quite a complex system, multiple parts working together. So you need the tools to help to add that together, to understand the relationships between the different parts, and to go from a lot of different bits into a sort of strategic decision-making tool. Listed on the side are a lot of the sort of technical aspects of how you make that work, which is not really the purpose of this presentation, but it's at the moment, it's just to say that this is how you have to develop the enabling environment for this. The reason you're doing that is to get the outcomes. So the outcomes are that our network, large scale infrastructure is transforming to be more sustainable, and that the citizens are engaged in that process. Now, not you can't really do much more than be engaged or understand or accept what's going on and be on with it. But the other side that I'm really aiming at is the much more neglected side of how do you get citizens actually actively involved in making the change themselves, helped and supported to change the heating system in their home, to change the drainage system in their home, for a farmer to change the way that he plows and manages his fields. And that's where this sort of emphasis on new modes of delivery really need to come. So I'll quickly run through an example where some of this has been done, in part at least, to give an idea of it. And this is taking the example of natural flood management. So natural flood management is a nature-based solution. It's a way of saying, instead of building a great big concrete channel to stop and take water away and to prevent a flood, what if I change the way that the fields are managed so that the water soaks in? We put little dams, small dams and things, and hedgerows and different measures in the fields and the woodlands, and reduce the flood risk that way. And natural flood management is tricky. It means working with farmers. They're not always the easiest people to work with and get active. And in this example, we're working with the national highways. So there's a national highways natural flood management fund, which was set up a few years ago. They put about £1 million into this overall, and around 650 of that actually went to farmers to undertake measures. And it's a pilot, so we're also learning how to set up the systems and make it all work. The idea of this is that there are certain national highways responsible for our strategic roads, motorways and A roads. And there are certain places where they flood. And they said, well, instead of pouring concrete and building tanks and doing that sort of stuff, what if we spent a comparable amount of money on farmers in the local area to reduce the runoff and reduce flood risk that way? Would it work? How do we do it? So we set about doing that. And basically, it meant developing the measures and guidance for people to help to know what they could do, and also digital tools. This is the digital twin coming into action, where you have a sort of a website that the farmer can interact with, together with people to support them in doing that, where you can quantify how much water a particular measure will store, and they can sort of put these on the screen and see what they're able to do on their land and what service that will deliver for national highways in regard to a specific hotspot. It's very abstracted, but it's quite a specific digital process. They can then bid for money to be paid to put that measure into place. And we can also quantify some of the multiple benefits, so not just the flood reduction, but also biodiversity gain, carbon sequestration, water resources improvement. This is still at a fairly nascent level, and these are not quantified well enough to really drive the thing. But this is the principle is there. And this also provides a process. So what I'm describing in my 3-tier model is this facilitating level, being there to provide the process to help the local stakeholder to engage in a process to get funded to change their infrastructure in order to deliver a service using natural systems or in partnership with natural systems in a way that can work. And what's particularly important in this is to have a contractual framework and a governance process so that you understand how national highways, how they are funding. Their funds go to Rivers Trusts, who we had as the main facilitating body because they could talk to farmers. And also we were there as consultants with other people as Atkins to provide the technical advice and to provide those sort of digital twinning tools. And you have those, say, these contractual arrangements. Rivers Trust have contracts with the landowners to deliver this work. They give the landowner is given money, some up front. They then build the measure. Then we go and check that it's there, and then you get further money for completion and for maintenance. So it's pitched in a way that it's worthwhile for the landowner to do it. They don't make a huge profit, but it's fair business. And you need to understand exactly who is responsible for what their liabilities are, what they're getting in return. That's the nature of a contract. But there's another aspect about nature-based solutions that one needs to understand, that you are also in a partnership with nature. Now, you can't have a contract with a natural system, but you can have a relationship with it. So when you are conceiving of these sort of schemes which are involving natural partners to deliver services, you also have to set out what you're expecting from them, what you're giving to them, and what you're going to do, when things don't work out, when they don't give you what you want, what you're expecting, or you don't give them what you're expecting. And you've got to have remediation, you've got to have arbitration. It sounds like a strange idea, but those basic contractual concepts extend to relationships with nature as well. The only difference is that the natural partner can't actually sign the contract. You have to act on its behalf and in good faith. So it's trying to understand how we can build a sort of framework for delivering these sort of solutions. So yeah, for the last couple of minutes, I'll just summarize what I've said, and then we could maybe go on to having some discussion and Q&A if people have questions. So my basic point is that we're part of a living biosphere, and it is the past and the present biosphere is what sustains us, and it also powers us now. We are consuming that, and that's how we gain our wealth and powers. And as important as lawyers and bankers and all of that are to our wealth, ultimately our wealth is based on the combustion chamber at the moment. It's having that energy, that ability to build everything that we have. You have to grow it, you have to mine it, and then you have to turn it into something using energy. We've got to stop consuming that biosphere. It's the easy way, but we do have alternatives. So we can understand and manage our relationship with nature through this sort of service model, understanding that relationship between the human and the natural partners, the contracts between humans, the relationships with nature, the quantification and the setting out of all of that. We have the option to work better either by bypassing or by working positively with natural systems. We can engage, embrace, we can make them better than wild systems would be, and we can do that without destroying them, and we can still get services for us and our natural partners if we look at the whole system and understand each side needs. This change needs people to be engaged with the process. People need to understand the large scale, the big energy schemes, the wind and solar and nuclear and big heavy stuff, the electric grid transformations. Yeah, people have got to be engaged with that. But much more so, we have to change the local infrastructure, our own vehicles, our own boilers, the materials that we choose to use, how we manage our land, how we deal with the water that's flowing over and through our property. And we need a much stronger system for engaging people in that process of transformation, because that's actually where most of the negative impacts are. Most of the emissions are from people's vehicles, people's boilers, people's air conditioning systems. These are what have to change in order to make that energy transformation. And we also have to massively change the way that we use land. And that has to happen at a very individual level. Most land is managed by individual small communities. Sometimes there are big corporations involved, but it's not the bulk of it. So in this, I present a model of how to go about transforming that local infrastructure, focusing on understanding the multiple benefits, what you get from different things that you can do, and then how you can facilitate that with funding models and contracting models so that people can implement that, and how you can understand your relationship with natural partners and deepen those so that you get your services from those partners, and you also consider their needs and the services they require from you. And so I also posit, just to finish with, a sort of teaser question. To me, it's working with living systems. That's true sustainability. And it's a different view from what they call the Brundtland definition from 1990, where we came up with the just this, the definition of sustainable development as being based on the caring for the next generation, but not taking more than you can provide to the next generation. And in terms of social equity, and then looking at it as sustainable development, as environment, society, and whatever, it's gone out of my head what the other one is. Anyway, I'm sure we all know that. But it's really about saying, how do we actually come to a point where we go back to being a positive, active member of the biosphere. Yeah, I think we could turn over to some Q&A, and just to sort of stimulate that, I've sort of gone back to the contents and saying, challenge is what I'm saying too idealistic, just plain weird, completely old hat and saying nothing new, or is it useful, and can we apply this and make things happen? So yeah, I hope that's of interest, and I look forward to a bit of time for discussion and debate.